Time to talk Big Ten championship game here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We go the Northwestern side, Big Ten Western Division champions. We've got Davis Rich on the line from Inside NU, the SB Nation platform for Northwestern athletics. Davis, how you doing today?
Doing good, adjusting to the cold here in Chicago. Now.
Absolutely. I'm here in Connecticut. It's been a straight transition from pretty much early fall straight into the deep dive. With a lot of cold weather, but I'm looking at the video from the Midwest, and I think you've gotten it even worse. The snow, we just got hit the one time, but I think you guys just received a recent blast.
Yeah, it was pretty brutal this weekend. I think like 900 flights got canceled on Sunday. My flight got delayed. It was a mess.
Oh boy, that's never fun. But you expect that in February, not November. But the other thing that may not have been expected was a trip to the Big Ten championship game when the season started. So most of us across the country had the typical theme of Wisconsin owns this division; they should be able to win it again. And if anything, a lot of people thought Wisconsin would elevate even further and differentiate themselves. And if anything, if there was a challenger out there, it was, of course, Wisconsin had to travel to Iowa, and that would be the big showdown that would decide the division. But here comes Northwestern plodding along after the non-conference missteps, getting the big win against Purdue that we didn't necessarily see as a big win in week one, and knocking off all the contenders.
Right.
So did you and your colleagues see this coming?
No, I don't think we did at all. I think most of us were pretty pessimistic after the 1-3 start, especially with how Northwestern played in losses to Duke and Akron. But I mean, this whole season has been just one huge statistical anomaly, pretty much. I think Northwestern, statistically by Bill Connolly's metrics, is something like 80th in the country, and somehow they're still 8-4. But this team just knows how to win. They know how to make the plays at the right times, and that's what's kind of led them to where they are today.
So let's start with Clayton Thorson, because obviously he's had quite the distinguished career. Started as a true freshman, led the team to 10 wins, went to a bowl game against Tennessee, and he's pretty much been the guy at quarterback despite maybe some limitations at times. He has the injury coming off the bowl game against Kentucky last year, take him the entire offseason to recover. And even early in 2018, his play was compromised, both in regards to quality of play, we would think, because his play was also compromised in regards to amount of plays taken. So how have you been able to gauge his development and his comfort in rebounding all the way?
Yeah, so the first 4 games, I think it was pretty clear that Clayton wasn't quite right. His knee wasn't quite where it needed to be. They were keeping the passing plan for him very conservative. Everything was in the pocket, quick throws, not a lot of scrambling or anything like that. And then after the team starts 1-3, Northwestern goes to Michigan State, and we kind of see the wrinkles start to come out. Thorson plays the whole game. They start moving the pocket around for him, taking some shots, running the ball a little bit more. And it's not like Northwestern's offense has been particularly dynamic or explosive this year, but there was a change in that Michigan State game. Thorson definitely started to look a little more comfortable, and his play's been uneven, especially the 4-week stretch. Rutgers, Wisconsin, Notre Dame, and Iowa, he really didn't have any good games in there, but he's looked healthy at least for the last 6-7 weeks, and he's been able to use his legs a little bit more, which has been a welcome addition for the Northwestern offense, especially, in short yardage and stuff like that. Clayton Thorson, I think, gets a lot of crap from Northwestern commenters because they see the body, they see that he's a 4-year starter, and they kind of expect him to be this, world beater, this all Big Ten quarterback. And that's not really who he is, but what he is he's a winner. And he's proven that time and time again. He makes the plays at the right time. He's not really gonna, throw his receivers open. He's never gonna look like Dwayne Haskins out there, but he makes the plays when they need to. He doesn't make a ton of bad mistakes, and he's led Northwestern to the Big Ten championship.
We've got Davis Rich on the line from Inside NU. It's the Northwestern blog there at SB Nation, the platform for athletics there with the Wildcats across the board. But of course, the big focus on football and a trip first ever to the Big Ten championship game, the conference championship game, not around for a long time. I think 2011 was the first year, but Northwestern shows up for the first time against Ohio State. So you talked about using his legs, and that kind of segues into the running game, which at one point looked like it was going to be a complete mess, was going to be completely non-existent. I love this statistic, running for 8 yards against Michigan State, still pulling off a win on the road. So Justin Jackson is the all-time leading rusher there and carried the ball 90-some% of the time. He was the guy for 4 years. So he's gone. Jeremy Larkin, actually, from a standpoint of not necessarily maybe running the ball 30 or 35 times a game, but in terms of adding another dimension, being explosive, home run hitter, it looked like there might be an upgrade there at running back in regards to bringing that dynamic aspect to the offense. And unfortunately, he had to retire. And then for a few weeks, looked like the running game was kind of lost. And now you come up with this Isaiah Bowser kid who looks like the typical mold of workman-like grinder.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people at the beginning of the season thought that Jeremy Larkin was as good, if not better than Justin Jackson. A great pass catcher, like you said, super explosive. And Northwestern rode him pretty heavily in the first 4 games of the season, especially with Thorson not being totally healthy. And then when he had to retire because of the cervical stenosis diagnosis, that was just a crushing blow to Northwestern, especially after the 1-3 start. It was pretty unclear what the Wildcats were going to do. They ended up going with John Moden, who's kind of been a career backup for Northwestern. He got banged up a little bit. They converted wide receiver Solomon Vault to running back. He wasn't super effective. He had a concussion and had to miss a game. And that's what opened the door for Isaiah Bowser, who was Mr. Ohio football last year, rushed for over 2,600 yards at Sydney High School in Sydney, Ohio last year. Was an early enrollee, Northwestern's biggest running back, but I don't know if people were expecting, what we saw from Isaiah Bowser. I think the best thing about him is that there's really like no negative gains. I mean, Northwestern's offensive line is fine. It's not great, but if Bowser gets met in the hole, he's going to drag that defender a couple yards forward. There aren't a lot of negative gains for this offense, which is really important. And the other thing about Bowser is he is a guy who can carry the ball 30 times a game, and he's not going to fumble. He's not going to get tired. I think in high school there were a few games where he had over 40 carries, so it's something that he's capable of doing. And he's been remarkably consistent, which is very, very impressive for a freshman. And we've seen kind of, as you mentioned, Northwestern had 8 yards rushing against Michigan State. Now they're running the ball 55, 60% of the time and passing the ball less and less every week. So we've kind of seen the pendulum swing in the other direction. I think we'll probably see more of that Saturday in Indianapolis.
All right, talking Ohio State and Northwestern from the Wildcats side with Davis Rich. You can join him on the Inside NU site. It's the SB Nation platform for Northwestern athletics. All right, let's hit the rest of the offense. You look at Flynn Nagel. Obviously, he's one of the top pass catchers in the Big Ten, in the Northwestern mold of what you would think, slot receiver, possession receiver, very dependable, had 60-some catches the last time I checked a few weeks ago. Can you round out the rest of the offense? You mentioned the offensive line. Obviously, that makes it all work.
Yeah, the offensive line has actually improved a bit over the course of the season. They were getting a lot of flack earlier in the year because obviously the run game was struggling. Clayton Thorson was getting chased around a lot. I think the offensive line is going to struggle against Ohio State. They struggled against Michigan. They struggled against Notre Dame, 2 teams with really good defensive lines, really good front sevens. I think that's going to be probably the most important matchup of the day will be Northwestern's offensive line versus the Ohio State front seven, because Clayton Thorson is more or less completely ineffective when he's under pressure and scrambling around. He's not the kind of guy that's going to make plays on the run like maybe Shea Patterson would. So I think that's a really big matchup. With regards to the pass catchers, you mentioned Nagel. He's been dinged up the past couple of weeks, but I expect him to play on Saturday. The other guy to note is Bennett Skoranek. He's kind of Northwestern's deep threat. He's a big body, 6'4", 6'5", pretty lethal in the red zone. So if Northwestern's kind of down on that end of the field, you can expect balls to go in Skoronek's direction. You might remember his catch against Iowa to kind of seal the Big Ten West. That was pretty phenomenal. So he's kind of the other receiver to note. The superback is Cameron Green. Superback is basically a tight end. Cameron Green's a converted wide receiver who plays tight end now. He's been a pretty good pass catcher. He has something like 40, 45 catches this year. But other than that, that's basically it. Kind of like I said before, I'd expect Northwestern to rely on the run a lot on Saturday and use the pass more when they need to.
Get Davis Rich on the line from Inside NU. It's the Northwestern blog there at SB Nation, covering the Wildcats top to bottom. Big Ten championship game coming up against Ohio State. I haven't looked at the line, but we can address that later. Let's look at the defense. Blake Gallagher leads the team in tackles. Paddy Fisher has been a mainstay for a long time, kind of the leader. I would guess the guy's a captain. That would be my guess. I don't know that for sure.
Sophomore too.
There you go. And then we got Joe Gaziano, who's making more of the disruptive plays in the backfield, leading the team in sacks and tackles for loss. So kind of round out the unit on that side of the ball for us.
Right. So the front seven is a strength of Northwestern's team, really. The defensive line and the linebackers are what have made this team really good this year. Really stout in the run game. Disruptive at times, but I would say the defense is more bend and don't break. So guys like Paddy Fisher and Blake Gallagher are really good tacklers. They're downhill linebackers. They're not going to be in the backfield a lot. They're not going to be racking up tons of tackles for loss, but they're solid. They get guys to the ground. And it's really kind of about assignment football, filling gaps, making sure that everybody is in the right place at the right time. Because when that doesn't happen, Northwestern usually gives up a big play. And then you mentioned Joe Gaziano. He's Northwestern's, pretty much their only credible pass rusher, I would say. I think he's the only guy with more than 2.5 sacks on the team right now. And he's also a pretty good run defender as well. Him and Jordan Thompson, are the defensive tackle, are kind of the two guys to look for up front. And then in terms of the secondary, I would say that's probably Northwestern's weak spot just because of the injuries. The last couple of weeks, Montre Hardage hasn't been playing because of an injury. He's Northwestern's best cover corner. Trey Williams, Northwestern's number 2 corner, has also been out. Jared McGee played last week, but he missed 2 weeks before that. There's been a lot of flux in the secondary, and the secondary's kind of held its own against teams like Illinois and Minnesota, but we saw what Ohio State did to Michigan on Saturday, and I think that's going to be a pretty big challenge for a secondary that's not super deep for Northwestern.
Yeah, I was going to mention that although we don't necessarily know the diagnosis on these players at this level, but we get some level of information back on the status of guys like McGee and Williams and Hardage, who jumped out at me when I looked at on collegefootballstats.com the injury list for Northwestern. And again, there's a listing there, and there's only speculation as to who's going to play and who's going to be able to play. But those guys are questionable, which typically means they're a little bit banged up, but they're going to be able to get out there. But those 3 names jumped out as kind of that when you're an underdog. There's a few guys there, obviously, that you want to make sure are ready to go when Saturday comes. So any other information besides that?
I would expect them to play. Pat Fitzgerald and the Northwestern staff are kind of notoriously coy about injuries, but all indications based on kind of how Northwestern didn't play these guys the last couple of weeks, I would expect that Hardage, McGee, and probably Williams will all play, and they won't be limited. Northwestern's going to run them out there because I think those guys need to play the games of their lives if Northwestern wants to hang on against Ohio State.
Yeah, I'm talking about hanging on. If you threw a score out there and it was like 38-10, then people would automatically think, okay, Ohio State won the game. There's the thought is that obviously it's going to be a nail biter if the Wildcats pull this thing out. Stranger things have happened in regards to actually winning comfortably, but that wouldn't be expected. So maybe it comes down to a kick. That hasn't necessarily been a strong point. You've shuttled in a few guys. I'm looking at the list, and Charlie Kubander is a guy that I've seen most most of the time out there for Northwestern with the kicking chores, and he's 3 for 7.
Right. So neither Charlie Kubander nor Drew Luckenbaugh, his backup, are listed on the depth chart at kicker this week, which would mean they're probably not going to play. So that means the guy's going to be Jake Collins, who's actually Northwestern's punter. I think he's something like 2 of 3 on field goals this year, I want to say.
Yes, he is.
I don't think he's attempted a field goal longer than maybe 35 yards. So I would expect Pat Fitzgerald doesn't like to kick field goals regardless, because he'll just go for it on 4th down pretty much, and I think that's what's going to happen on Saturday. Northwestern's not going to kick a field goal unless they're inside probably the 15-yard line, and Jake Collins feels pretty good from there, and I think playing indoors will help Northwestern as well in that regard. But the kicking game is probably not going to be as big of a factor, just because Northwestern isn't going to use the kicker very much.
Well, Davis, I got to tell you, I talk to people every day. I have people comment on the segments that we record and the live streams we do, and I'm kind of in the minority. I'm fascinated by the likes of Northwestern when they succeed, as they typically do. 10-win seasons, 2 of the last 4 years, and the other one obviously getting to the Big Ten championship game. Duke's had success recently. Obviously, Stanford's kind of the gold standard of academic-oriented schools that have reached the elite of college football on occasion, and some other ones like Vanderbilt. So I get intrigued by certain programs, and this program has always intrigued me because I've been fascinated as to how do these guys compete. They don't rank in the top 50 in the recruiting rankings. They're out there against Ohio State and Michigan and other schools in the Big Ten and beyond that they're able to hang with. Now, you see that occasional game of an aberration in terms of score when you think, okay, Northwestern, they needed to bring all the technique and all the grit and the fundamentals, and they didn't today, and therefore they really got outclassed on the field, and bam, there's your 30-0 game against Michigan 2 years ago, and those kind of scores. But otherwise, I'm fascinated, and don't hold this against me, but I was this much intrigued and rooting for them to lose their last 2 games, just for the oddity of it would have been fit if Northwestern shows up at the Big Ten championship game at 6-6.
Right.
I wasn't rooting against them, but I just thought that would have been strange and would have been fitting again. They beat all the good teams in the Big Ten West and then lost to other teams. And here's a team that lost to Akron most famously, and oddly gave up more points to Akron than anybody else on the schedule. They lose to Duke by 2 scores. They almost find a way to lose against Rutgers, who everybody else bludgeons by 5 touchdowns. And then they turn around and they line up against all the teams that they were underdogs against. And the one that really got to Pat Fitzgerald was the last game against Minnesota, in which they're an underdog, with Minnesota showing up with really nothing to go on against a team that had proven so much. They go on the road. They're an underdog. They're an underdog against Wisconsin and double digits against Iowa and all these games. And they win all the games that they need to, even against Michigan, big underdog. They take them to the wire. It was just an odd season from the standpoint of looking at results. They take Notre Dame down to the last 2 or 3 minutes in a 3-point game at that point. Just odd from the outside looking in regards to what Northwestern's capable of, but what their ceiling and their basement is.
Right. I mean, I think with Northwestern, they kind of play up or down to their opponent, kind of to whoever their skill level is, and that's not so great when you're playing Rutgers, but it's great when you're playing Michigan or Wisconsin or Iowa or whomever. So I think kind of with what you said, I would expect a close game on Saturday. There really haven't been that many. I mean, like you said, the Duke 14-point loss was, I think, the largest margin of the season for Northwestern. I mean, heck, they even beat Illinois by only 8 points this past weekend. So I would expect a close game. I mean, Northwestern, they might not have all the talent, the highly regarded recruits, but they're really well coached. There's a really strong culture of, togetherness and even confidence. I think the team is very, very confident with how they've been playing the last 8 weeks. And it works. I mean, the results are proven. So I think the line right now is something like 14 for Ohio State. I would expect this game to be a little bit closer than that.
Yeah, that's pretty high. I didn't think it was going to get into that range. I hadn't looked at it, but I was expecting more in the 8 or 9 range, something like that. I think it's just it's classic what Pat Fitzgerald did in preparing the team for the Illinois game and then approaching that game. I didn't know exactly how it was strategized. Obviously, that game was a little bit off the radar because of it being meaningless in the division. But I heard the post-game comments. I read the recap in which, he pulled Thorson, he pulled Bowser, he pulled a number of guys on both sides of the ball early in the second half. He took a calculated risk because Illinois had a drive there within one score and got inside the 10-yard line to win the game. But he took the risk, looking ahead, thinking, hey, I want a rested team. I want to have that advantage over Ohio State, who had to play its hearts out, obviously, against Michigan. And it may prove to pay off.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure how much of a difference it's going to make. It was certainly an interesting decision, and I think it angered a lot of fans, especially people who take the rivalry with Illinois very seriously. But I mean, in terms of how it'll affect Saturday, I'm not sure it will have much of an effect, especially because, I mean, most of the defensive guys that Northwestern kind of relies on were playing the whole game through the fourth quarter. I mean, Paddy Fisher had the game-sealing interception with 2-3 minutes left in the game. And it seems like guys like Thorson and Bowser are ready to play a full game at this point in the season.
All right, we got Davis Rich on the line. You can join him and the rest of the staff there at Inside NU. It's the SB Nation platform for Northwestern athletics. Of course, the Wildcats face the Buckeyes in the Big Ten championship game. And lastly here, Davis, obviously, you know what the stereotype is here. You know what people expect. Even though Ohio State's been up and down, we saw their ceiling last week. We know that the talent's the top 2 to 3 rosters in the nation. If you just look at recruiting rankings, they basically field an NFL team on both sides of the ball. Versus Northwestern, there looks to be mismatches all over the place. But as you're talking about and outlining for us, I think it's going to be a good game. I think they're going to hang in there. But you know what the stereotype is, and you know that you're lightly regarded in this game.
Right. I mean, I think the pattern of this game will probably mirror what Northwestern tried to do with Notre Dame pretty closely, in which they run the ball a lot, kind of try to control the time of possession. That game was tied 7-7 at halftime, pretty low scoring. And then kind of in the second half, we saw Ian Book and the more talented Notre Dame receivers kind of take over the game and kind of score at will. But, I mean, Northwestern got a blocked punt in that game. They kept it pretty close. So I'd expect kind of something like that where Northwestern kind of tries to get Ohio State off its game, doesn't let it play, too fast, doesn't let it have the ball too much. But at the same time, Northwestern's going to need a turnover or even 2 turnovers to swing the momentum, I think.
All right. We encourage you to check out Inside NU. It's the SB Nation site for Northwestern athletics. Of course, coverage for the Big Ten championship game with the Wildcats and the Buckeyes getting it on Saturday night. One last thing, Davis. What would this mean for the Wildcats? Obviously, there's nothing tangible in regards to it's a Big Ten championship, but in regards to everybody's hyper-focused on the playoff. But a Rose Bowl, of course, that take Pat Fitzgerald back to his glory days with Northwestern's only trip, at least in modern times. And obviously a Big Ten championship that was completely unexpected.
Yeah, I mean, I think already the season is very successful, even with the early season losses. A Big Ten West championship is something that Pat Fitzgerald has been talking about for a really long time, and Northwestern just built this $270 million sparkly new facility kind of in the hopes of being, a Big Ten West contender for years to come, and this is a really good step. It means a lot to Clayton Thorson, the 4-year starter. It means a lot to Pat Fitzgerald. It means a lot to this class of seniors who have had pretty much unparalleled success at Northwestern. So it's already been a pretty magical season, at least the last 2 months or whatever. A win over Ohio State, who Northwestern has lost to 30 of the past 31 times they've played, I think, would be pretty unbelievable. I don't know if the Rose Bowl would take Northwestern at that point over Michigan. I don't know exactly how it would work out, but that would be pretty crazy. I think Northwestern fans would probably share that assessment, but that would be pretty crazy.
Well, they are the Big Ten champions. I think that would be unprecedented if they were not selected. I think they have to be selected.
I'd certainly think so, but Northwestern, I don't know. They've got screwed over before, so we'll see.
That has never happened. Any Big Ten champion that goes to the playoff obviously can't go to the Rose Bowl. That's been the only exception, a BCS championship game or a playoff appearance, and all those are Ohio State appearances, the playoffs and the BCS championship game. So that's never happened otherwise. So I would be on a rant, and I would be on a rampage if Northwestern got left out of the Rose Bowl. I don't know.
You're Northwestern to win the Big Ten and not go to the Rose Bowl. That's what I'd say to that.
Yeah,
that'd be very.
You know, Davis, we appreciate you stopping by. Appreciate the information and the insight. You're welcome anytime. We hope you the best, wish you the best at the Big Ten championship game, and enjoy the game.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.